maybe
Let's go.
delete the previous repost call. Oh yeah, okay. Now I see it on my YouTube. Okay, cool. I'm gonna add the thumbnail. All right, it should work.
Yeah, I see it on Twitter now.
Okay, I'll share again, and then we can get started.
Yes, for sure.
By the way, James O'Byrne doesn't buy the innocuous outcome here.
Yeah, did you see his other tweet where he in I don't know what he said, like 2022, 23, he shares about the random number generator kind of issue that he found. He also, I think he names it like there's a default, like it goes back to a default. And then the reply was, if this was a thing, we would already know about it or something, like just this asshole reply. So yeah, okay. It's also live on my YouTube, so I think we can start.
Yeah, I saw it on your YouTube.
Okay, cool.
Didn't they also? I saw a couple things where they were made aware of some sort of bugs in years past, and they didn't really fully act on it. I don't know the full details, but something of that.
No, there was actually
variety.
people that had their wallet drained in like 22, and they never got a reply. So yeah, it's really crazy. I think just in general, the whole communication right now is crazy. They were selling the flawed cold cards and just sharing, update the firmware when you get it and a link with it. Like, it's wild. All right, let's just start, guys. Welcome to the first Bitcoin for Millennials Think Boy session. I think there's a lot going on, and I like these group discussions that I sometimes see. I've never really done it like this, so I thought, okay, who are the biggest Think Boys I know? And so now you guys are here. I love all of your guys' takes. So yeah, I just thought it would be fun to sit together and just jam through some stuff that is going on. And obviously, the biggest thing going on is the COLDCARD hack. And yeah, we were just talking about it, how on one side, it's amazing that you can see like the whole community rallying, a lot of white hats that are in the community, people coming out of their, dark cyber holes to rescue and help people. Brandon, you shared that you've also been calling a lot of people, right? That our customers at Swan. And so I think it's really cool to see the community is rallying, but at the same time, I think we all have different thoughts about what could actually be going on. Like, is this a genuine hack? Is this a way to actually draw out a lot of people and I don't know, create some sort of social graph or whatever? And yeah, let's maybe just start with there. And maybe the biggest question that people are discussing is self-custody over? I just wonder what you guys think, even if that's a stupid question or if you actually think that's true.
I think I've already been, tweeting about some feelings that I have around the industry as a whole. Looking back at my time at Blockstream and just in general how long I've been in this space, and then trying to objectively look at how things has progressed. And there's a lot of stuff that has developed in the right direction, I think, but I feel like the rest of the world just doesn't care about it. And we are kind of like ultimately building for a French cohort of the world that just cares about stuff that the rest of the world doesn't care about, essentially. And I have, I'm coming from Argentina. I come from, the exemplary country where, the damages of hyperinflation has really kind of like destroyed the social fabric of the country, has, ripped families apart, has just destroyed the trust in society, whatever. And, people are not killing each other over sats in Argentina, and that has kind of like led me to think that, Bitcoin was created in the Western Hemisphere. The majority of users are going to have been from the Western Hemisphere. And when you look at the different like sub cohorts in the West, there are like the people who are like, they're like the radical cypherpunks idealists who see a lot of value in Bitcoin, but then you have a lot of like people who just understand financials at some level, because the majority of people that have embraced Bitcoin, they usually start with embracing it for NGU, and then they kind of like stay for the NGU, 9 out of 10 times, because they're financially literate, right? They know concepts like, hey, this is a predictable issuance that you can extrapolate until 2040. They see the value of no central authority issuing Bitcoin at a whim, supply and demand laws and stuff like that. And I come to think like, hey, the rest of the world needs Bitcoin too, but the rest of the world only, there's a third of the world that are illiterate, like straight up can't read. How many of those that can read are actually financially literate? Just that question alone is like the biggest black pill, because that's the moment that I realize, at least, like, hey, Bitcoin is forever going to be French, and what we can do is to try to grow this little pie that we have. But ultimately, the Bitcoin is not for everyone mantra is like very true. That was my thinking before all of this COLDCARD shenanigans happened. Now that this has happened, I'm like, whoa, we don't really have the tech to back up our claims when it comes to this whole like, hey, cypherpunk, self-sovereignty, let alone people are not really following. Because if you take a look at the people who bought the COLDCARD, and everybody who is unfortunately affected by it, they believed in the ideology and the marketing and the communications because that rang a bell. They identified their ideology with those messages. But in terms of taking action, they didn't really take action. They just, trusted the entropy, did not roll the dice, and chose single sig. So it's like there's a big like wedge between all the communication and all the language that we create in order to get people from the outside into Bitcoin, and then the actual actions that are being taken. And that's another kind of like layer that made me like, hey man, this is as French as it's going to get, because we can go so far with marketing and communications and all that good stuff. We got the slogans, we sound real cool, cypherpunk has some kind of a aesthetic, but it's just not going to be this like hyper Bitcoinized future where your grandma can just be on a Bitcoin standard and buy all the groceries with Lightning and stuff like that. I just feel like it might happen, but not in our lifetime.
Yeah, I think Cole definitely has ideas around it.
Yeah, I think my main idea is that like we don't know. Like, I think with this specific incident, I actually think it makes self-custody stronger in the long run, because I think Bitcoin is a mirror of nature, and nature learns from itself and grows in its intelligence when it makes mistakes. And I think Bitcoin and people building around Bitcoin will do the same thing with this incident, because they don't want to be in the shoes of CoinKite and COLDCARD. I do think that like the future still is heading towards hyper Bitcoinization. I don't know the timeline of it. I don't know exactly how it gets there. I do think that as many people that use money have a use case for Bitcoin, and the wave of Bitcoin in being superior money is continuing. I think 95% of people that self-custody were unaffected. Their methods are still strong and secure. Like a week ago, we weren't really talking about this at all. But I do think it's really indicative of how strong Bitcoin is as an industry and a culture and a community. Like Eric Yakes had a quote, a tweet, I should say, that I really like. He said, "Bitcoin is the most unique industry in the world. At the drop of a hat, experts from around the industry dedicated days and nights to ensure people do not lose money." I don't often see pure altruism, but I believe I saw it here. There is a sympathy amongst Bitcoiners as a group where hearing these stories of loss are simply hard to hear, and many of us couldn't imagine this happening to ourselves. People stepped up and got shit done, and that is a beautiful thing. Bitcoin is unique in that everyone holding it has a vested interest in its broader success, and that has created the voluntary collaborative environment in pursuit of the actual social welfare. This incentive is why Bitcoin will win. And I do agree with that. And I think it does. He opened his tweet with the point that small hobbyist companies are a risk, and this is a good filtering mechanism. And I agree with that. Like, COLDCARD is it's a relatively smaller company than most of the solutions, self-custody solutions in the space. And I don't think that boxes them out in the future, but I do think it kind of points to self-custody solutions being run by larger teams with people with more expertise or experience or more front-facing appearances in public, things that are maybe a little bit more transparent in that sense. And I think it still makes self-custody stronger. Like, how do we build solutions? How do we implement our ideas to self-custody money in a more secure way? And I think builders are already doing that, whether it's at COLDCARD or otherwise. And ultimately with self-custody, I don't think everybody will, but to me, it's more so the fact that everybody can. And that's the same thing with verification. Like, not everybody will verify every single line of code within Bitcoin, but everybody can. And I think that's the key difference between the current system we're in and where we're going. And the importance of that and the fact that it's baked into Bitcoin, I think is really what separates it. And I think it'll continue to make a difference. But ultimately, like, we don't know where it's going to go. I don't know if my grandma is going to be using Bitcoin in 10 years, but I do know that Bitcoin is superior money, and the incentives point towards the money heading towards the Bitcoin network.
Yeah, there's a physical limitation in terms of how many can actually self custody, right? There's not enough UTXOs out there to actually fit the entire world. So there's just going to be a custodial compromise on the road to hyper Bitcoinization if that happens, where everybody will have the need to self custody.
Right.
Well, that's a shame. You're forced to choose a provider who can custody for you. But also the fact that, I think the majority of people who are safe aren't necessarily the ones that, roll the dice 100 plus times necessarily. It's just people who chose Trezor or Blockstream Jade or some other vendor who just have better entropy at the hardware level, right? I think the majority of people are just looking to not complicate their lives too much. This is human nature. No matter where you come from, I think you rather just be able to push a button and let the product do the work for you. So I think a lot of people are probably, surviving, but probably double checking their actual settings on their Trezors or ledgers or whatever, and they're lucky that they bought a product from a company that cared more. So I don't think the standard is going to be more people will learn how to throw dice. It's going to be, okay, all the remaining companies that have products, they have to sit down and say, okay, what do we do to make this easier for people? So they choose the best solution in the easiest way. And I think the only company who had done that so far is the BitKey people. And when they released the BitKey like a year plus ago, dude, they got so much shit from these Bitcoin maxis. And that tells you a lot about the culture, right? Like, they got so much shit and they're actually creating a good product that is seeing that future that I'm talking about. So
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I will let Brandon go, but for me, this is the whole tension, right? Like, it is on one side, okay, if I think I have an idea of where the money is going, right? The fiat money is going down. I need to protect myself. Okay, so that is Bitcoin. How can I actually protect myself? I can protect myself by having it in my own custody, right? Putting it in a different place introduces new risks and challenges again, right? Everyone has their own risk profile, etc. So that is all fine. I think, in with modern day money, people also custody, their assets in all these different ways. So that is all fine. But I think for Bitcoin specifically, it's a very big trade-off between getting the value from it, the non-monetary value of it in that sense, right? But I also agree that self-custody, to a degree, for a lot of people, is not is not practical, or it seems too difficult, right? Where then for me, on the other side, right, I think, if I see someone roll dice 100 times, it takes them, let's say it takes you 60 minutes being very focused, you can protect $1 up to $100 billion or $1 trillion against any debasement, confiscation, and all that stuff, which in my mind is pretty radical and pretty cool. But I'm also realizing that I'm part of a vast minority, right? And so this for me is where the tension is. And the fun thing, I don't know if a British Hodl is watching, but he just DM'd me. He said, "Ask them, what Bitcoin wallet can you guarantee beyond a reasonable doubt is safe right now that you have personally verified and would trust with your and your family's money," right? And I think it's interesting that, I mean, I respect his point of view totally, but it's a good question. It's a very good question, because for me, based on what Cole said, right, I also think it feels like we've been kind of like noobish. Like it's noobish, like we're in this war against fiat money, monetary debasement, all that stuff. And now we're realizing, well, maybe a 10-person team is not really equipped to take on a, I don't know, well-funded Lazarus group or some other hacker group, right? And now we're like, oh yeah, well, jolly do, right? But yeah, so again, I don't really have a point. I just think this tension is interesting that, I think the answer to British Hodl's question is none, right? There's always this outsourcing of trust to a degree based on your interest, your skill set, your knowledge, your whatever. So yeah, I also really wonder what you guys think. And Brandon, maybe you go first.
Yeah, a couple of thoughts here. So I think high level, useful framing here, like we're having culture rifts, we're having confused people, we're having this ideological core butting into mainstream usage, and people are all upset about this. So there's a lot going on here. And you guys know the book Crossing the Chasm? It's like that bell curve chart, and
Yes.
on the exponential, you have like the early adopters,
Innovators, early adopters, early majority. Yeah.
And so right after the early adopters, which is at like, I don't know, 12% of adoption or something like that, there's this period called crossing the chasm, which you're transitioning from very different user groups. The early group, they're people who like new things. They're willing to put in the work, read the podcast, buy a cold card. And then after that, the mainstream market, those are people who just want solutions. So they're not going to come here to fight the state or any of these ideological things that we rally around. They're like, hey, does this help my life? Is it easy? Does it fit in? Okay, turn the sports ball back on. Right. And I think it's very obvious that we're in that chasm now. And that means we got to put on our big boy pants. We're going to be disillusioned by the culture. In my opinion, Bitcoin culture peaked like 2022, maybe. And it's been slowly declining since. And I think that's not necessarily a bad thing. I personally dislike it because I enjoyed the culture. But with the fullness of time, it's going to be very obvious that that was an early phase that was never going to last. Just like Shinobi's tweet about the early internet and how it was a radically different thing and people would get excited about it. And then, okay, the internet's the internet. And I think we're dealing with the same thing here in Bitcoin. So that's my initial thought. Regarding custody, yeah, I think the idea that everyone was going to be using self-custody Bitcoin was never going to happen. Number one, yeah, UTXO scale relative to people, that's one issue. But I think it's more like people want convenience. Humans want to trust. We consciously outsource trust all day long and subconsciously do it. Our brain wants to take a shortcut. There's no way we can learn everything. So we use our heuristics to trust people. Obviously, trusting MBK, Odell, and the large group of people promoting COLDCARD, myself included, screwed up there. But yeah, we're not going to get to that point. So the real goal is a high percentage of coins in self-custody. That's what actually matters as a defense mechanism against a honeypot attack. And so we should accept the fact that the long tail of people will not be doing self-custody. yeah, we should also make the tools easy, because if you need it, there is no alternative. So it is our duty to make it easy, but we should accept the fact that it will never be mass market. You brought up, does it make custody stronger? Yeah, of course. Now all of a sudden everyone knows about entropy. We know about random number generation. We all learned a whole bunch of stuff about generating seed phrases, and the absolute fundamental was neglected here, which is embarrassing, and hopefully self-custody gets better. But I think from a cultural standpoint, the self-custody mantra is very much harmed. I think anyone who experienced this, who was around during this period, will not forget this moment. And so, you're already seeing ETFs blowing up with deposits. Swan River, all the exchanges are getting tons of deposits. Many of those are just temporary, but conversation I'm having with clients is the idea of where you custody your Bitcoin is now in question. And so, like, for example, my wife is saying, I explained the whole thing to her over the weekend, and she said, why don't we move half our Bitcoin to an ETF? And I didn't have a good answer for her there, in that moment. And so I don't plan to do that, but the idea is out there, and this will change the culture forever. And yeah, it's a sad day in Bitcoin, but if you zoom way out, this was all obviously going to happen, not necessarily this hack, but this cultural transition was always going to happen. And if it doesn't happen, Bitcoin was doomed to fail from day one. If Bitcoin can't survive this transition, it was always doomed.
Yeah.
And I believe it will survive this transition, to be clear.
Yeah. And this, I just Googled, chasm is at 16%, 16, which sounds way more percentage-wise there than I personally think where Bitcoin is at. But maybe this is how we also get there, right? I think Fernando talked about, the Spotify moment. We have convenience versus control. I really think we're in the middle of that. I wrote an article about how the Bitcoin capitalists will take Bitcoin across the chasm, whether we like it or not, right? You also hear sailors say, 99% of all the capital in the world is not in Bitcoin, which is also just true, right? So yeah, maybe Fernando, you can share a bit about like your thoughts around what you saw with the P2P sharing and kind of this cypherpunk thing in music, and then it actually flipping to Spotify basically and Apple Music. Do you see something similar here? Because the only thing I would add here is that music is convenient and fun. Protecting yourself from monetary debasement, having your own property is at a very different level in terms of how it helps you solve problems or fulfill any needs, right? So it's like entertainment versus actual livelihood.
Well, yeah. I mean, the stakes are definitely higher when it's, you're comparing protecting a new way of digital money versus, file sharing of music and movies. But the commonality between, the torrents and the Bitcoin P2P money movement is that there's a subculture that carries the technology in a way, right? So the simple fact of file sharing through torrenting is a cool and decentralized way. And then if you are a nerd, you can geek out about all the technical components about that and how that works and find a lot of, happiness there. But the simple thing is like, this is a technology that carries a culture. You share music. People in, I don't know, Sri Lanka can download Menace to Society and they can like watch that, right? Like you don't need to physically, that information asymmetry that had a physical limitation where you actually had to travel to the US, buy a VHS, for example, and bring back the videotape to your family in order for them to be able to see it. That broke, right? And that carries culture. That makes the, I don't know, rap music, become a global phenomenon. That makes punk music become a global phenomenon, and you get all these like subcultures around the world through the help of the internet. And I think that is something that you can totally look at Bitcoin with the same lens. Because apart from the crossing the chasm theory, which is more about like understanding a novel technology, there's another like similar crossing the chasm, barbell that is more about how subcultures, like the evolution of subcultures, right? And there's one article I really want to share. I can share that on Twitter. That is called Geeks, MOPs, and Sociopaths in Subculture Evolution. I got that in front of me right now. Let me read something to you so we kind of like that we can get the framing of the cultural aspect of all of this that we're talking about. Let me just read quickly. So before there is a subculture, there is a scene. A scene is a small group of creators who invent an exciting capitalized new thing. This could be a musical genre, religious sect, a film animation technique, a political theory. Riffing off of each other, they produce examples and variants and share them for mutual enjoyment, generating positive energy. This new scene draws fanatics. Fanatics don't create, but they contribute energy, their time, money, adulation, organization, and analysis to support the creators. Creators and fanatics are both geeks. They totally love the new thing. They're fascinated with all its esoteric ins and outs, and they spend all available time either doing it or talking about it. If the scene is sufficiently geeky, it remains a strictly geek thing, a weird hobby, but not a subculture. But then when it grows, if the scene is unusually exciting, this new thing can be appreciated without having to get utterly geeky about the details. And that draws something called the MOPs, the MOPs. They are fans, but they're not rabid fans like the fanatics. They show up to have a good time and contribute as little as they reasonably can in exchange. This is kind of like where Bitcoin has been for the past 17 years. You know, it's like the geeks, they welcome the MOPs, at least in the beginning, and it's the mass of these people who turn a scene into a subculture, and then it starts to grow. And then when it grows big enough, that's when the sociopaths come in, when they see, hey, this is a movement that is big enough for me to leverage something. This could be I don't know, influencing thought leadership, building personal brands, becoming famous. And that's kind of like where we are right now in the middle. And when you create this type of environment, there's a lot of beliefs that is purely based on what a certain group of people are communicating. There is no fanatical, geeky, like it was in the beginning, where everybody was looking at the code. There's a big invisible layer in between those like hardcore code reviewers and everybody who just like the sound of don't trust verify and think the COLDCARD looks pretty cypherpunky in the design, right? So we're kind of like now paying a little bit of the price of becoming, too big in a way compared to where we were, let's say 17 years ago. And I think that's also is a pretty interesting, crossing the chasm type of barbell visual, because we are now paying a lot of the price, like I said, but then what the future will hold, the next like logical step is the complete institutionalization and the financialization of Bitcoin, which we have seen since 2022, 2023, the beginning of, right? So I think happenings like this, when self-custody, when companies blow up like this, I think the bigger players, the institutions that are kind of like still not in, they might see an opportunity because they have the money to either buy smaller companies that will become more and more distressed over time in the next year or two because of AI. I mean, just this week we have seen Bolt's cease operations. Lendasat, I don't know their new name, but the company that used to be called Lendasat has also halted operations, and they all say this is because we're getting constantly attacked through AI, right? So these smaller shops are just not going to have the capacity, both team-wise, like hands on deck, nor financially, to really keep up with this. So who will have the money to actually put real talented people that demand a really high salary, plus all the expenditure for the tokens in order to just protect and build a defense? It's going to be the biggest companies. It's going to be either the ones that get shitload of money selling Bitcoin, which is exchanges, or the ones who are selling the wrappers, which are the ETF dealers. So they are going to come in and scoop up the smaller companies. We're going to see a bunch of mergers and acquisitions. And I think that's the next leg. And that's going to change the culture as well. And that's kind of like, back to your point, Brandon, sorry for the rant. That's the Spotify moment, right? It all started with the Pirate Bay. Torrenting was a thing. Everybody could download a movie or music, whatever they wanted. It was free. It was unstoppable. The powers that be at that time, and I was working at Universal Music back in the late aughts, so I was kind of like front row watching this. They tried to put the Pirate Bay guys in jail. They tried to seize their servers. They tried to stop the website, and none of these things work when you're dealing with decentralized tech. In the end, they gave up, and they say, hey, Spotify, they gave permission for Spotify to be built, which is, by the way, from Sweden as well, the same country where the Pirate Bay folks were from. And the big record labels at that time, when Spotify decided to IPO and enter the US market, the Sony BMGs, the Universal Musics of the world, they were like, okay, fine, we are allowing you to do this as well, but we're going to be a major shareholder. So I think they IPO'd in the US with the big four companies owning a total of 25-30% of the shares in Spotify. And that's what it is. Like, they took the MP3 technology that was available for everyone on torrents, they wrapped it into a nice UX, nice UI like Spotify, and the majority of people went that way. Torrenting still exists. There's still possible, I still do it to this day, but it's compared to the user experience of Spotify, it's 100 times more tedious and complicated, and not so great compared to just paying for Amazon Prime or Netflix. The important thing is that torrenting still exists, that it has proven itself to be unstoppable. But if you take a look at now in terms of consumption of music and films, I mean, the streaming platforms have totally won, and they're making a shitload of money, even way before their business model was about physical media and selling CDs. They are making way more money now. So from what I see, Bitcoin is kind of like going through the same challenges and will be in the next coming years.
I think that's a great analogy. I think it's entirely spot on. And I love the geeks, mops, and sociopaths. I've seen this article before. Forgot I had seen it after I just read it again. I think it's interesting on the next one, on the sociopath invasion. Right? Like, in my history in Bitcoin, I got involved in 2017 and full-time in 2018. And I used to think that Bitcoiners were like a moral compass in the world, and the average Bitcoiner is a better person, and we can trust these people. And that may be true on the margin, on average, slightly more aware, or something like that. But then you have to be aware of, as the culture grew big enough in a legally gray area, in many cases, the sociopath came out in droves. There is so many crazy people in Bitcoin or the broader crypto space, stealing money, exit hacks, and they're very good. They show up slick. They know the right things to say. They know how to look the same. They blend right in, and then they rug. And yeah, I think it's an eyes wide open moment that people like NDK, who had as much brand reputation in the Bitcoin culture as anyone, and everyone bent the knee and just trusted. And I think we should be woken up to that and accept the fact that Bitcoiners are people too. There's a lot of money to be made here, so we should actually be more vigilant in this community rather than less.
Totally.
Yeah.
Let me maybe just read the paragraph for the sociopath so we do the full circle.
Cool.
So, a subculture at this stage is ripe for exploitation. The creators generate cultural capital, i.e. cool, right? Like cypherpunk cool. The fanatics, they generate the social capital, a network of relationships, strong ones among the geeks, and weaker but numerous ones with the mobs. The mobs, when properly squeezed, they produce liquid capital, money. None of those groups have any clue about how to extract and manipulate any of these forms of capital. The sociopaths, they quickly become best friends with selected creators. They dress just like the creators, only better. They talk just like the creators, only smoother. They may even do some creating, competently, if not creatively. Geeks may not be completely fooled, but they are also clueless about what the sociopaths are up to. It's pretty interesting.
That's fucking wild. But my question would be like, this is probably always inevitable, right? And it also only happens to things that actually have value. right? Like I usually think about the world as like a war of ideas, right? Every, there's an infinite amount of ideas. I always, in the context of Bitcoin, I always think like, imagine how crazy it is that this fringe idea on a fringe forum actually still exists after 17, almost 18 years, right? And it holds X amount of value. It survived endless attacks from its birth, basically, and logically also, right? Because it's challenging the main illusion of the modern world, which is fiat money, right? So it's like super logical that it gets attacked, but it's fucking insane that it still survived, right? And my main argument in this Bitcoin Capitalist article is that they wouldn't fucking run with it if it wasn't worth anything, right? You know how many random stupid shit is out there in the world, right? So that's always, although I don't really like that the finance bros figured it out or the sociopaths figured it out, it does signal that there's value in Bitcoin itself, or else all of this stuff wouldn't even happen. Cole, I saw you wanted to talk.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I love the analogies. I think they're spot on, and I think the further away you get from the the creators and the kind of the base layer of the cypherpunk ideology, the more people are less interested in like the hardcore ways of Bitcoin, like the super self-custody, separate from the state type of thinking and ideologies. And so they're looking for solutions that, as we talked about, are convenient and they're trust-based and all that stuff. And just as you said, Bram, I think it's inevitable. Like, it's an inevitable process, and it's also a clear signal that Bitcoin is growing and evolving and spreading its way throughout the world. But I think with Bitcoin culture, I think it's easy in bear markets to get wrapped up in that we're kind of like, there's kind of a wet blanket over the entire market and the discourse in general. It's like if Bitcoin explodes to the upside in the next 3 to 4 years and it reaches $300,000 a coin, I'm sure everyone would be saying culture is way better. But I think in this specific moment, and this tends to happen with every bear market, it's like FTX happens, everyone's panicking. But if you zoom out and you're like, all right, if Bitcoin still exists 10 years from that point, so 2032, does this make Bitcoin stronger? Does this make custody solutions stronger? And I think most people, and we would say yes, and I think that's still the case with this current incident. And I actually think it doesn't only make self-custody solutions stronger. I think it makes solutions for the greater public who aren't willing to roll dice 99 times. I think it makes those solutions stronger as well. And yeah, it's an inevitable process. And I think it's interesting to see how it plays out, because there are factions maybe that aren't the most exciting that are getting into Bitcoin, like creating wrappers and ETFs and things and profiting fees off of, creating a wrapper that isn't actually Bitcoin. But it's an inevitable part to kind of break fiat from the inside. And it's an inevitable part of the adoption process, which I think is kind of cool to see it evolve from this super strong, hardcore cypherpunk ideology, which I wouldn't necessarily say I'm a part of. I think that's a very small minority, but crossing the chasm is, I would agree, Brandon, where we're at now. And as we move into the next wave of towards the end of the decade and additional bull markets, we'll see how it plays out.
Yeah. Well, the fact that we have so many different factions coming into Bitcoin that are at times they feel like they're totally contradictory, I think it's a good thing, obviously, because we can't expect Bitcoin to grow significantly if we only have one message that we have to share with the world, right? Like, a lot of people don't give a shit about like self-sovereignty, let's be real. But if you, for example, tell somebody in Argentina, like, hey, if you want to prosper and thrive, you don't have to emigrate from Argentina. You can stay with your family in your country. Just get a laptop, get some, acquire some skills, and get paid in Bitcoin, and you can open your business to anyone in the world, right? For example, that's a huge value prop. I don't want, if somebody in Argentina, and this is the case for many young people right now, if I can get to them, that's the message I'm going to try to convince them about Bitcoin with. No way in hell am I going to say, dude, read the white paper first, and then you gotta read Mises, and then you gotta go through all these like ritualistic hoops before you can actually earn your first sats. No, it's like, dude, open your laptop, get a Bitcoin wallet, get paid in Bitcoin, stay with your family, stay with your mom, stay with your nieces or whatever, and then you figure it out how to custody and stuff like that later. And that's what people really care about. And we have to also realize that, you know, we live in a society that is a direct consequence of people mobilizing together, whether it is through religion, Christianity, whatever. In the West, we're kind of like reaping the fruit of the labor of a lot of people who came together and built stuff together. So we need trust in institutions. We need trust in, you know, third parties. We can't like grow our own food all the time. Yeah, we need to go to the supermarket and grocery store to get our basics, right? So we can't really extrapolate that like self-sovereignty, 100% individualistic mindset into everything that we do in the world. And that includes the way we talk about Bitcoin to normies. I mean, we just gotta understand that Bitcoin is so many good things to so many different people. Like literally, you have a really good case for Bitcoin if you talk to somebody who's like completely zombied out on like leftist ideology. Bitcoin will make a lot of sense to those people, and also for somebody on the far right politically. So, and those two extremes and everything in between, right? So I think we just, as a community, as individual, like orange pillars or whatever, we got to understand like, hey, this is part of the growth. A lot of people that are different are going to come into Bitcoin and see value in Bitcoin. We got to cater to whatever their needs are, whatever job they need to be done. Try to convince them by being a little bit more smarter and not like insufferably just banging on the same drum all the time. You know, like that's what the BIP 110ers are like really doing, right? And they're cringe to me. So for the first time in my life, I'm actually seeing how outsiders look at us Bitcoiners. That's kind of like how I am looking at BIP 110ers right now, and it's cringe.
Yeah, we'll get to BIP 110. I wanted to say, Cole, your mic was a bit cracky, so maybe you have to reconnect it, or when you reconnect, I'm not sure what it looks like in Riverside, so maybe you have to refresh. But yeah, just check it out for a second.
How is it now? Is it better?
If you talk a bit, I think it's a bit better.
1, 2, 3.
Sounds a little better, but a little cracky still.
Yeah.
Okay, let me.
Cool.
Yeah, try something cool. I want to add a point to that last one, Bram.
Go ahead.
Kind of ties into Fernando as well, but what came to mind is like push versus pull on the culture, right? You join Bitcoin, you feel like you discovered a secret to the universe, you want to tell all your friends, so you evangelize, right? Then you do your whole tour of duty, tell everyone you've ever met, even when they don't want to hear it. You realize that it doesn't work. Hey, you got to read Human Action. It's only 1,200 pages of indecipherable.
Or the Bitcoin Standard, which is fucking long too. Yeah.
Or the Bitcoin Standard, which I think is a much more digestible book than Human Action. But anyways, we try to push the culture on people, and people are allergic to this. We have an innate ability to sense that when we're being scammed or evangelized, and we reject it. On the opposite side, Fernando, to your point, pull. We want to pull them in by demonstrating that this is valuable to them. And in Argentina, maybe that's taking payments for your business. In another country, maybe it's an Android phone and storing a couple sats there rather than storing your wealth in tin or cinder blocks or cows or whatever. And then the culture, if they're interested, if they then find value in Bitcoin, they're going to naturally want to go a little bit deeper. And then they might go read the canon that we now consider part of Bitcoin orthodoxy. And one more point here. Remember the progressive Bitcoin movement? Mm-hmm. This was maybe like 3 or 4 years ago. Some left-leaning people felt comfortable being public on Twitter. I thought this was a good thing. I share very little political persuasions with that group. However, it's obviously a good thing that a non-orthodoxy group is joining Bitcoin. And yet, what did we see? We saw a huge autoimmune response from the right-leaning Bitcoiners who couldn't imagine progressives being helpful to Bitcoin. That's so crazy, and it's entirely like protectivism over your culture, and it's loser behavior. You don't want to win, you want to protect your little cultural nugget. Like, that's insane. And we still see it today. Like, the BIP 110 people would like to say this about one group, the non-Bitcoin 10 people say this about the other group. Anyways, we'll save that one, but
Yeah,
interesting
well,
observing those patterns.
I do. What I love is that there are some extremely timeless memes in Bitcoin, right? Like, Bitcoin doesn't care. It doesn't care if you don't like the progressive people. I'm also not necessarily aligned with the progressive people, right? But it doesn't really, like, Bitcoin doesn't really care in that sense, right? Like, and I agree, it would actually be extremely good if those people joined it. But I also think, in the context of Bitcoin and what it is, and kind of like the phases that we went through. I mean, I have jokingly here, like, I have the INTJ hat, right? Like, this is from Brandon's research into, the personality types and stuff. And Brandon and I did a podcast on that too. Like, it's just an extremely small group that just thinks in a certain way. I'm not necessarily sure if INTJ and INTP people perhaps are a little bit more right-leaning because they just, I don't know, think in a certain way, or I don't know, maybe Brandon has more ideas around that. But I wanted to highlight like two comments I saw in the YouTube chat, right? Because we're kind of talking about what is the behavior of people. Again, I think in the context of Bitcoin, it's all online, right? Like, everyone is online, everyone is digital, or reaching all these people around the world. I'm a random Bitcoin person that started a podcast, and some people watch. Like, all the people are just trying to support in their own way, saying these things in their own way. So I saw a comment that said, "Just say it. The cool kids were having so much fun LARPing as finance bros. They forgot the plebs were relying on them to be tech bros. Unforgivable hubris." And then the reply says, "They LARPed at the same time. Together they fed off each other's energy. They are the ones that smile and say all the right things and have no fear, because fear is motivated by side money." I don't really understand the last part, but my point is more like, to go back to, if this was a stupid idea that had no value, nobody would even pay attention to it in any way, right? Any person that you would align with or don't like, or whoever you're seeing online that talks about this topic that you, for example, the people commenting, also find interesting or think they need in their life, right? Eventually, I do think Bitcoin is just an extremely brutal, it's kind of like a brutal game, right? Like, you figure out that fiat money is, has all these issues, etc. You don't want that for your future. You need to protect yourself. It's like radical ownership pretty quickly, I think, once you see the whole fiat money problem. And then you kind of get, because in the context of Bitcoin, it's so early and such a huge undertaking. Yeah, you literally fall down the rabbit hole where there's like actually genuine people, there are sociopaths, right? And it's all digital and people are anonymous, and like, it's just a crazy wild west that you kind of like put yourself into. And that's why I think it's a radical game, because you also have to be radically aware of what you're doing. And unfortunately, we can only determine what was wrong when we look back, right? For example, with what is happening with COLDCARD. But I don't subscribe to the notion of, that's what I see sometimes. Like, people say like, oh, if someone is making money off something, that's bad, right? Like, you cannot have a business. It should all be altruistic. It should all be like no, dude, like that I don't think is how it works. And we've talked about it. If we want to go somewhere serious, and the topic of Bitcoin is a serious thing, yeah, there is serious money and other types of people that you maybe don't like, but they also need to figure out and support Bitcoin, because they touch other people again, right? So it's I think it's needed for adoption. And I'll read out the Shinobi tweet. I also shared it in the chat, and I also had to think about, like, today there's no internet conferences, right? I love that example. Like, in 1992 or 3 or 1990, you had internet conferences, and all these nerds and geeks went to internet conferences learning about new modems and whatever. Like, there's no internet conferences anymore. And I think it'll be the same with Bitcoin. But yeah, this is what Shinobi said. Bitcoin isn't a movement anymore. It's a technology well on its way to being actually embedded in society. The internet had a culture, early on, but after it actually got on its way to societal integration, that culture became irrelevant. It spawned whole new cultures. It massively impacted and instigated evolutionary changes in existing ones. That original culture during the birthing period became totally irrelevant. That is what will happen with Bitcoin. It's not special. It's like all technologies. This is how it always goes. Being activistic and trying to exert control over Bitcoin to stop that from happening is futile and idiotic. Trying to make Bitcoin conform to your culture or values is a waste of time. If you have values you want to spread or embody, use Bitcoin to do that in other ways. Stop trying to make Bitcoin comply with them. It won't, because that's not how it works. And it's so funny because I don't like his style of communication in general. Like, that is not my person, right? But I could not agree more, right? So yeah, I maybe this is a nice kind of like tweet, and in a combination of I don't know who said it, but like reaching the normies or like the orange pilling part, maybe, yeah, that is kind of done. Sadly, I also want to say, right, like I would love for all of us to reach more people, but like, yeah, what do you guys think? Is this, are we there? Like what Shinobi is saying, is that actually where we are?
Quick thoughts here. Oh, go ahead, Cole.
Well, first off, how's my audio?
Sounds better. Your video is better too.
Yes.
Okay, cool. Awesome. Sorry to interrupt, Brandon, but I think first is, I don't think the orange pilling is done, because there's still hordes of people complaining about the government while using the government's money. Like that's one layer of it. I think there's so many people that don't even understand the money that they're using, be it the US dollar or any other fiat currency, and there's a lot of monetary education that's still to be done. But I think it brought up a fascinating question for me, and I'm curious what you guys think. Like, how does Bitcoin culture evolve specifically within like our group, or this kind of like current 17-year population within Bitcoin? Like, what does that look like in 10, 14 years? My kind of guess is the conferences they're not as big or as institutional. They're maybe a little bit more like what Bram is hosting in a couple of weeks, where there's smaller, more communal type of gatherings where like true friends consistently come and gather together, and that thing kind of grows and evolves. And it's like, I think the path with being a Bitcoiner, and I'm class of 2022, so I don't have a ton of history with it, but at least in my experience, when you first get into it and start to see it, there's like this really strong, passionate fire about everything, and it feels like you want to burn the forest and chop trees everywhere and go everywhere. But then the more you get into it, it kind of gets like almost a little bit boring in a sense, and then you start to focus on more of the more meaningful things in your life. And like Bitcoin is kind of just like the foundation to a house. It's like, yeah, it's doing its thing, but it's beneath the surface, and I'm going to bed in my bedroom and doing all the other things in my life. And so I'm curious, like, how do you guys see, and I think it's an interesting point from Bram, like, how does culture with the internet conference point, how does culture evolve within Bitcoin?
I have a very short thought on this, not fleshed out, but a lot of people, and this is a transition later to BIP 110, a lot of people talk about stewardship, right? Like, and we'll have a topic at the end, like, is Bitcoin for 50, 500, or 5,000 years, right? Like the whole stewardship, the reason of existence, the core principles and values that emanate from it. Like, why is self-custody important? Why should there be a lot of Bitcoin in the hands of plebs? I do think that's extremely interesting and relates to what you're saying, Cole. Like, that has to permeate, like that understanding, like the actual why of Bitcoin. If I think if that is forgotten, and this is with any technology, right? Then obviously a technology like this dies. But if it's useful, like the internet, and it becomes more clear why it's useful, and more people figure that out, then obviously it stays alive. So that will be my only thought around this. I don't know how it's going to go, but I do think that is very important.
Yeah, a couple of thoughts here. First one, I don't think I don't think the culture is dead. I think the culture is just diluted and it has less impact. It just doesn't matter like it once did. And I think that pisses people off. And Bit 110 feels like the last gasp of flailing and trying to make this previous cultural relevant point or something like that. And I think it will fail, and I think it'll be obvious in hindsight. One analogy I used to use for the bee cachers is, do you guys remember that story from World War II where a Japanese soldier was in the Philippines and his job was like to be a guerrilla fighter, and war is over and he's still running guerrilla raids 30 years after World War II is over. And they didn't know what to do. They couldn't communicate with him. So they were flying planes, dropping flyers over his recent attacks with signs and like newspapers showing the war is over. No, 30 years later, dude's still fighting it. So I used to mock the bee cachers and the BSVers for this. I think the Bit 110 crowd will get the same label in the fullness of time. But one other point here on an essay I'm still working on. I'm going to try and tie this in, but there was a Native American group called the Apache, well, still is. And they migrated from Western Canada when the Ice Age was starting to melt. So northern US and Canada used to be covered under a mile or two of ice. That melted. This group crossed over the Bering Strait, down the Southwest corridor, and settled around like Arizona, New Mexico, Texas. Okay, started as one group, but along the way, different groups fractured off, and they said, oh, I like the Rocky Mountains, you know, a quarter of the group's going to stay here. Then you go a little bit further. Oh, here's the plains. We can go chase the buffalo. A group stayed here. And over time, that primary group, let's say the Bitcoin culture, fractured into all these subgroups. Now they live in different ecosystems. They have slightly different ways of life, but they all still do carry that long-term historical cultural heritage. And so what does that mean practically? It means those Apache tribes, they operate independently with no hierarchy. They don't report back to the ultimate leader. They operate locally. However, in times of need, okay, all the Apache tribes are, you know, being attacked by the Comanche moving west or the Spanish moving north into their territory. What happens? Then they band together. They don't have hierarchy, but they have this like self-preservation incentive alignment for their long-term cultural arc. And that to me kind of feels like where we're at with Bitcoin. And none of those groups matter individually, but when we all come together to defend the network, which it's in our incentive to do, I do expect people to cross those lines and defend the network. Now, there's a risk there, right? A decentralized network is more anti-fragile. It's harder to stop. It's harder to coerce. But if we don't sufficiently organize, we can be fractured, divided, which is a very sophisticated and effective technique for someone trying to disrupt a movement. So it's like, optimistically, we'll come together when the time's right, but pessimistically, we're going to be so fractured and easily attacked that way.
Yeah, I like that a lot. I think, Brandon, you said, you know, use the word delusion, which I think is key, because you can feel like with almost every Bitcoin cycle, the culture gets diluted, right? But I think that's a good thing. I mean, just to use just a music analogy again, the future of Bitcoin is either three things. It either acts like, you know, the grunge music. I don't know if anyone remember that. I'm aging myself like crazy. But
Punk rock, punk rock.
punk rock is the second. The first one is grunge, very specific, where like bands like Pearl Jam and Nirvana just became huge just by accident. They didn't ask for it. They were just playing the music that they were playing in Seattle at that time. It just so happens that, you know, outsiders saw it and then it just blew up. And they were kind of like, you know, pop stars without never wanting to be that, right? But the grunge movement kind of like peaked and just crashed after like a few years, right? So either Bitcoin does that, we peak like crazy in culture wise, and then we just flat out crash, or number two, we do the punk rock thing, where like punk rock has like roots, history, certain rules, you know, to what is considered real punk rock. And then you will always have people playing, you always have punk rock bands, and they will be, you know, underground. And then you will have the Blink 182s that are like totally sellout compared, like a real punk rocker would think, right? But they still are able to become like super mainstream containing some of the ingredients of what punk rock is, right? So they have some of the sound, which is kind of similar. They repackage it a little bit to be more mainstream, but it's still punk rock, but not like real punk rock. And that has like a longer shelf life than the grunge movement had. Or number three, Bitcoin becomes like rap music, also like from a very specific place, like grunge, from a very specific time and place that had like very strict rules, but then it just metastasized into different styles and genres that always changed its sound, but it was always in a way that was like backwards compatible, like like soft forks of the real boom bap rap from the East Coast, and it's still considered rap music, and it's still huge. It's still mainstream, and they have never kind of like come down from like blowing up in the '90s. I don't know if that makes sense, but I think that's kind of like the three directions that I think for the culture, what Bitcoin kind of like is looking at us now being at the crossroads at it. Because I think the dilution of the kind of like cypherpunk values is positive, because when you really think about it, a decentralized protocol that aims to be strong need weak communities, okay? Because weak communities, they can't really coordinate changes, right? Like you have to be super super organized in order to coordinate a change in Bitcoin. And if there's like one prevailing group or culture or a certain mentality mindset that anyone can just plug into and be like, okay, I subscribe to this ideology, then we can enact change to the protocol. I think that's extremely dangerous, right? So the worse we get at organizing, the kind of like the safer the protocol becomes from our own stupidity, right? And I think that is a real threat, because you mentioned, Brandon, the the way that the progressive Bitcoiners got like completely bullied out of the Bitcoin. The same thing can be said about Gloria Shao, right? Like one of the actual core devs. That's dangerous, and it's all social engineering. It's all like culturally done. And yeah, Bitcoin doesn't care. It's a protocol, I know, but like humans are behind these changes when they are affected, right? So we got to think about the human layer, the social layer, and the weaker the community becomes, the more diluted the Bitcoin culture becomes, the more the more positive our future looks like.
Yeah, two quick points here. One, on that, I totally agree. In my opinion, the number one value or feature of Bitcoin is that it's hard to change. It's not 21 million, it's nothing else. It is Bitcoin's hard to change. Because if Bitcoin's easy to change, it will be captured, it will be co-opted, and we will lose the fight prematurely. And so, yeah, I can't emphasize that enough. Somehow people don't seem to buy into this. Maybe you guys do, but I still feel resistance with that idea. And to your point on diluting the culture being positive, yeah, it makes the network harder to change, which is good. And it also makes it more appealing to the mainstream. If you have to cross all these cultural purity tests to own Bitcoin, then it's going to be small forever. And so the dilution is necessary. The Blink 182ifying of Bitcoin is a positive sign, even though it feels bad to the people holding on to the culture. Right?
I love that. Yeah.
Because we can't lose that part completely, right? Like when you talk about like the, when you take a look at, I don't know, brand marketing, right? Like there's a certain, a brand that has a DNA that is distinguishable, that has a voice, that has a tone, that actually plants a flag in the sand and say, we are against that, we are for this. This is super important, especially in this age where everybody is suffering from information overload and like can barely, like the forget about attention span, the consideration span is like half a millisecond, right? So you survive and you can influence other people to warm up to your idea if you have a strong set of beliefs. So it's important that that doesn't go away, but it can't be the one thing that people need to go through. The door, we need to flip the door and be like, the cypherpunk shit is kind of like what you see like midway. It doesn't have to be like the very first touch point, right? And for that to happen, we need to be able to, just sell Bitcoin in like different ways that is more mainstream, so that is more digestible. And then we kind of like Trojan horse all the cypherpunk values, because it is important that we carry that unless if that disappears, the entire value proposition of Bitcoin disappears.
Yeah, I do think the cypherpunk stuff is in there, right? Like, I am not the cypherpunk person, but I do think I very much adhere to the principles that come out of that, right? So they did bring me more into that, right? And I think that, you know, if I think about it, like, that's like this ripple effect, right? Like, I'm not the cypherpunk guy. Maybe I'm like a 20% cypherpunk type person, or 25% or whatever. But like, in what I do or how I talk about it, I do think it comes back there, and eventually, you know, the bullying or the whatever, like, eventually Bitcoin is neutral. So maybe we should also start acting like that, right? Whereas it doesn't really matter who join, like, Bitcoin doesn't care who joins it, so why should we, right? But the issue I see, this fun, I have thought about this for a long time, but this is actually the first time I can ask it to a group that maybe can answer it. You know, with a lot of previous big technological adoptions, right, it kind of was just there, like, oh, there is now internet, or oh, you can have a mobile phone, like, oh, the newspaper, right, or oh, you know, the train, or whatever. Like, there wasn't really that much discussion on very big technological things that were introduced, right? But Bitcoin is introduced on the internet, where people can get information every day. They can discuss every day, right? They can discuss positive things. They can discuss negative things. They can influence each other. There's psyops all around, right? So on one side, you could say, like, well, in a very basic sense, the Bitcoin use case is extremely clear, right? Like, you can protect yourself from monetary debasement with an asset you can actually truly own. Anything else in the world that is a financial asset, you can never really truly own. The only one you can truly own is gold, which has inferior characteristics to Bitcoin. Boom. That would be my pitch, right? So it's just very, very clear. But because the topic is so big, money and all this influence, and fiat money is a crazy enchantment, right? People have no fucking clue. If you go out into the street, 99% of people have no clue that fiat money is even a term, right? And so I think Bitcoin's adoption is also stifled by and kind of slowed down by the fact that people are always talking about this, right? So even the discussion around the technology is also diluted with, you know, fucking 40,000 crypto tokens, FTX, oh, boom, bad, you know, mass media says crypto is dead, Bitcoin obituaries, you know, there's thousands. So on one side, all the information is already there, right? I say Bitcoin is an asymmetric opportunity based on public information. Anyone can actually educate themselves. But on the other side, there is an even vaster amount of stuff that could distract you information-wise, but also discussion-wise, right? And so maybe this is a bridge to BIP 110, because a lot of people are fucking black-pilled, dude. Like, they are so doomer, and it's easy to be a doomer. I think it's fucking boring to be a doomer. And I think if you actually see Bitcoin for what it is, you would not be a doomer. Like, I do think there's a little bit of kind of like faith in the positive outcome that's needed for Bitcoin, because this is a huge thing that we're trying to achieve with this technology, and we don't know what the future looks like, right? But man, a lot of people are fucking black-pilled, and they like talking about it like that, right? And they like getting clicks and the crazy thumbnails and all that fucking shit. And so what do you guys think about, and we'll get to BIP 110, but like how Bitcoin adoption is actually slowed because it is happening in the time that it's happening, where there's just way more distraction and dilution to the actual almost basic message of what this technology can do for people. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it's slowed right now. I think even with, like, outside of the Bitcoin or crypto space, there's so many distractions. Like I think kind of the main next wave of people to adopt Bitcoin is this group that basically every day is aware that the government is corrupt, politicians are corrupt, there's this war machine, we're fighting endless wars, all of these other, like, prices are rising all of the time. there's like this felt or experienced or awareness around like something is wrong with whatever, but we don't have the root cause to it. And so there's this like what I would call anti-fiat group that isn't aware that it's fiat is the problem. And I think the way the wave crashes into Bitcoin from those people understanding that fiat is actually the root system, and then seeing that Bitcoin is just better money, and then being like, I think even past that, it's to a point where I just want better money, and people move into Bitcoin because of it. And the solutions are more convenient, they're simpler, Bitcoin is more established, like, and I think it kind of increases in that sense.
A couple quick points on the black pilled stuff. So
can you repeat what you put in the chat?
Yeah, in my opinion, if you're black pilled on humanity, that is sort of like it's a consequence of a world with no purpose, no meaning. It's a consequence of modernity. And so finding out that the world is not what we thought, there's bad things going on, etc., and taking that black pilled stance, you're just finding purpose in your own life. Now I have an enemy. Now my work is larger than myself. And humans by nature need that. And throughout history, we would get that through family or religion or the mundane. And in modernity, we have to actually find a way to instill that or manufacture that in our lives. And so that leads people to be lost at sea, and they latch onto things like the black pill narrative. And the exact same thing is true with Bitcoin. Why did Bitcoin culture become so powerful? Why do people treat it as a fraternity and look up to these people? It's the same thing. We found purpose in life as well, pushing back on a fiat state. And yeah, it's the same instinct for both of these two things. And I think that the upstream issue is modernity and humans not having purpose.
Yeah, which is, I think that has always been part of being a human. I think no matter what time and era in history you're looking at, right? You always had that like desire to break through what you see right in front of you to something higher than yourself, something that has a deeper meaning than what you see directly in front of your eyes. And yeah, you're totally right. Like we were like, you know, we were promised flying cars and the information highway, or whatever Bill Gates was calling the internet back in the 90s. We were kind of like going to have the Library of Alexandria at our fingertips, and everybody's going to be so like educated and well-read and so intellectual and so be so based. But the opposite happened, right? Like we were literally stupid. We had never been more stupid because of the fire hose of information that we see every day. And I think we had this like period from the 1930s, 1940s maybe to the 2010s, which was like more of a like a glitch in the matrix, where, you know, information was presented to us through few channels, few options, and, you know, we had like this sensation of like, hey, if you sat down and you had dinner with your family and you watched the show at like 7 p.m., big chances were that, you know, you had somebody else maybe at work or somebody else that saw that same exact show the day before, and you had something to talk about. And that extrapolated through like watching the same news, the movie, series, etc., radio shows. You kind of like felt like some kind of a cultural cohesion among strangers, right? And there was a thing that was carrying the culture forward. And that that was like great for the US, for example. That was like a, you know, insane, you know, golden age in terms of Americana culture. And you know, you can point at it now and say, holy shit, this is America, right? Like it's even aesthetically very has a strong identity. But then, you know, the internet came, kind of like blasted all those like few channels wide open, and we now are trying to, I think the 10-15 years that has passed ever since like social media came to the scene and like really decentralized information and the way we communicate to each other, we're now at a point where like I think we are becoming more tribal, right? Like we can't, it's like the Dunbar number just for your brain in terms of information load. There is a limit, there is a hard cap on how much your brain can process everything that you see every day. And the fact is that you're not supposed to know that, I don't know, there was an earthquake in Karachi, or there was like a flood in Papua New Guinea where 75 people died. You're not supposed to know that shit. You're supposed to know what was in your society. You went to the square, you talked to people, you heard the town gossip, and that was kind of like the extent of your information. And we are carrying hundreds of years of that into this era, and our brains are like completely fried. And I think we are now kind of like rotating back to the tribalism, only we find those tribes online. And that's what Bitcoin is one example of that, right? But there's like thousands of like, hey, if you like manga and anime and you're in fucking Nairobi, yeah, you can find a community online and you can like geek out about it. And we're kind of like going back to the tribalism. And I think it's a good thing. It's like a shame because you can really, really, if you try to have like an eclectic taste, you gotta like fight against, you know, the YouTube algorithm, and you gotta like force signal YouTube that you're interested in mid-century modern homes, but also Bitcoin, right? So you get like some kind of a nice mix when you get your your algorithm is suggesting stuff to you. But we don't act. The 99.9% of people are just like Bitcoin podcast times 1,000, and then they're just going to end up in this like never-ending hamster wheel of like all this the same information, and they will never really change their mind. And that is the reason why we got so far to this day. But then now I think, the advent of financial podcasts about Bitcoin, or like circular economies in Costa Rica content, like we need more of like those that different content, and they will capture their own audiences, and they will probably be in their little like smaller hamster wheels, but at least we get different stories and different ways to look at Bitcoin that will carry, the next leg of adoption.
So maybe
Couple
let's
points.
talk about, Brandon, you have something?
Just a couple quick points. I totally agree on the evolutionary biology angle. Our meat suits are adapted to live in 100, 150 person tribes. So why do we feel bad when we're left out? Oh, that feels so bad. Our biology is telling us, it's hearkening back to a previous era where you got kicked out of the tribe, and that means gene death. So your genes do not get passed on. So we carry that forward today. And yeah, we're not supposed to know about the disasters around the world. Our body can't recognize the difference between that and a lion or a tiger in our village, right? So we're constantly agitated. That makes us easier to control. That makes us think poorly, etc. And I think what's interesting tying it to America right now is, yeah, you brought up the monoculture era, Pax Americana, post-World War II until the internet. Right? Limited information source. We all have the same echo chamber. Even if the information is all entirely lies, we have a shared reality. We have a shared experience that allows things like nationalism to exist. And now today we have two things fighting against that. One, we're in our own reality bubbles. So we don't share kinship with our countrymen in any capacity like years past. We share kinship with these micro niches. And at the same time, what is America? The social contract of America is the promise for opportunity, the opportunity to see upward mobility in your life or your children's life. And today, young people do not see that same opportunity. And rightfully so, they go to their parents' house and they realize, wait, at the current trajectory, I will never own a home like the one I grew up in. And that is a really, really hard thing for people to accept. And if you don't have upward mobility, you don't have hope for the future, socialism starts to look like a pretty good idea. Obviously not, but I understand why young people are seduced by this path. And so, yeah, bad for big nation states, bad for nationalism. That's the takeaway there.
Which is, I don't know if it's good or bad. I mean, the same environment that kicked the progressive Bitcoiners out is a byproduct of that. The people who bullied Gloria Shao out of working for Bitcoin is a byproduct of that. That's a negative byproduct of that. The positive byproduct is that we can get different people back into Bitcoin and they be convinced about Bitcoin in their own terms, but we got to like make sure that they don't they don't meet the opposite faction online, which is weird, but I guess that is what is needed in this day and age in terms of how we communicate with each other and process information. We just got to be tribal and separate, but at the same time together. Weird times.
Yeah. So let's move. It's it's so interesting. I see a comment here. How do you millennials think that we can have a decentralized network with a bunch of co-opted fag motherfuckers messing around with the reference implementation? Critical thinking, too many cereals for, for breakfast. And I see another tweet that replied, a tweet that replied to, us being live on X with a picture. It said, anyone notice the drop in 10 plus year holders 10 days before July 30th? Doesn't seem like a coincidence. Someone was tipped off. Someone needs to look at those coins being moved between July 20th and 29th. And I think, now let's go to BIP 110. Like, this stuff is what puts me off. Like, I am not interested in being a doomer. Maybe I'm a negative guy. I have a certain naive guy. I have a certain idea of Bitcoin. If Bitcoin propagates and more people get to it in their own way and eventually understand why it exists, although we can, repeat that, a million gazillion times over, then I almost want to say we also have to have a little trust, or I call it faith, right, in the fact that Bitcoin actually shows that to the people that come across it and adopt it, right? Like, there's a lot of stuff that is still out of our hands. And so whenever someone comments like, "Oh, this is fishy," or "This is dark," or the whatever, these people are meddling and whatever. Yeah, maybe that's true. Maybe it's not. But what are you going to do about it from your little basement here? And I just wonder what you guys think, especially in the light of BIP 110. I feel that, for me, why I don't support it, for me, it's a reaction that in my mind doesn't, how do you say it? Like, it's not on the same level as the threat or the supposed threat, right? Like, it's an emergency. It needs to be quick. This is a temporary fix, and like shit like that. For me and my understanding of Bitcoin, I don't think this is the way you should change consensus and the way they've tried to gain, let's say, social capital, because I think that is what is needed for getting more people on their bandwagon. I'm not saying bandwagon in a bad way, but like, if you want people to help you support your cause, don't fucking crash out, when they have questions, because from my understanding in the history of Bitcoin, that hasn't really worked. I mean, look at Roger Ver, right? Like, that's a prime example for me. So yeah, I just wonder what you guys think. I see, Fernando, you had a picture of Don Quixote talking about how BIP 10 is attacking imaginary enemies. Maybe that's a nice start.
Yeah, I mean, I just don't get it. Like, okay, you don't like the fact that people are putting JPEGs, but it's still a valid transaction from a technical standpoint. You wanna maintain the monetary properties of Bitcoin, where you pay for a transaction to go through, right? And that transaction goes through. If we lose that, Bitcoin is not money anymore. Bitcoin then becomes Ethereum, which is a completely arbitrary blockchain, where in the past you have you've done a reorg on an arbitrary situation on the whim from a few people, and still to this day, on the technical side, in terms of transaction output, there's like thousands and thousands of dollars every single month being lost by people who are paying for something on Ethereum, and it just breaks and they lose money. I don't want Bitcoin to be that at all. I want Bitcoin to be reliable. I want people that want to use Bitcoin for whatever reason it is, including JPEGs, are able to do it. It is permissionless, right? It's supposed to be neutral. It's not supposed to be controlled by a small minority who, just because they think babies are dying, like Roger Ver was also in his time, that's enough to change the protocol. And it could be an even greater cost than just stopping spam, quote unquote. It could be like, I don't know, life or death shit. You got to come about it with technical rigor. You gotta achieve community consensus, and you gotta have other people who are not necessarily believing in your emergency narrative look at your proposal in an objective, neutral way and say, hey, you know what? This has merit. And I think they went through that process, and the reaction was, this doesn't have merit. And then they cranked up the narratives with some other bullshit that just resonates with a French minority who still believe in the, that we are badass. It's us against the state, separate money from the states, GFY, all of that, like that mantra, right? Which is literally just everybody's parroting each other, right? And that had enough volume at least to make noise on Twitter. And then after making that noise on Twitter, we started looking at, okay, how many miners can you get on board? Let's see the hash rate of this proposal. And it's pathetic. And now they're back to just the narrative again. And from like I don't know, they need to pick up the influence book from Robert Cialdini or something. Like, they need to really understand how strangers work. Like, when you're trying to convince a total stranger about something that in your mind is an emergency, you can't just shout at them. They're going to be defensive. They're not.
CSAT.
Yeah, right. All of that. Oh yeah. No, you're a P3 D0 if you if you don't come to our team. Like, it just doesn't work. So from a narrative perspective, they suck. From a technical perspective, they obviously suck. It's like written on the wall, and it's pathetic.
Well, this is my biggest contention is, I think in Bitcoin, if you want change, so I would accept a change if there's consensus, even if I don't agree with whatever consensus is being achieved on. Does that make sense? Right? Like, so, people say, oh, Taproot bad and this and that. I don't have enough technical chops to say it's bad. But yeah, this is how it works now. So if this is how it works now, I have to make my own decision if I still want to follow what appears to be the longest, most heaviest chain, right? And so if you want to change that or introduce your own consensus change, you have to play the same game. That is, how do I get a change in Bitcoin? And from my interactions on X, it seems like people don't understand that, right? Like they are trying to project their value on a network that doesn't really care. And so if you want to change that network, you have to build that consensus, right? And so if I then jokingly say, well, if you want to put your money where your mouth is, are you prepared to fork off? Because that's how this game that you're participating in eventually works, right? Proof of work for me is walking your talk. It's not projecting your virtue, right? It's putting your money where your mouth is. Proof of work. So you either get consensus in this game or not, and then if you do get consensus, even if I don't like it, then it's my decision if I want to continue following this chain. But if you don't get consensus, you need to think about what you've been doing and how you want to continue, right? So in that sense, this is also why I love Bitcoin. It doesn't really matter if there's a proposal and people only shout about it. It's eventually about having that consensus. And now, some people will be in the comments or whatever saying like, oh, you're a retard because this or that or whatever, blah, 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 sucks. Well, yeah, if you think it sucks, you're still here, you're still using it, right? And you're trying to change it. And that's okay. Everyone can try to do that. And if you don't like it anymore, you can sell it and or fork off. Like, I don't know if it's deeper than that. But for me, the way that it's going is just kind of my contention with it. Like, I just also see it differently, and that's fine. But then I'm a P3 D0, right? For having my own thoughts, random guy on the internet, so that's, I don't know, it's just not appealing to me.
See, Sam. Yeah, I think, like, to me, the 55% threshold is quite low signal, figuratively and literally. And then
it's a courtesy call. They say it's a courtesy because they have so much leverage. It's a courtesy. Oh, sorry, I'm just,
And then at the foundation for me, like, Bitcoin is, and then whatever words or virtues or views you insert past that, it's up to you. And it's not like, what do I say is valid as Bitcoin? What do I say is valid in Bitcoin? What does Bitcoin say is valid in Bitcoin? And in that sense, it has this neutral, permissionless, nature-like property to it, to where if someone inserts a transaction that is valid to the Bitcoin protocol and they pay the fee required to do that, and Bitcoin says it's valid, then Bitcoin says it's valid. And I'm cool with that, because I don't want human beings and our subjective fallibility to say what is and what isn't tolerable and what is and what isn't allowed within the Bitcoin network, because then we veer off towards middlemen, we veer off towards fiat operations and ways of operating that I don't want anything to do with. And I think Bitcoin's neutrality and, kind of free market dynamic, where it's like, okay, if you're participating here and it's valid within the Bitcoin protocol, then okay, then it is what it is. And how someone perceives it, how someone reacts to it is up to them. But it comes down to what does Bitcoin say about it? And I think the BIP 110 idea, to me, when it started almost a year ago, it's like, core might be bad. Let's say core is bad. That doesn't mean BIP 110 is good. Your ideology might be strong. That doesn't mean your technical implementation is strong. And those two things, I think, have been conflated. And I see a lot all the time of, like, someone responds with a technical rebuttal to BIP 110, or arguing against why BIP 110 doesn't work on a technical level. And then they say, well, core is bad and does this, this, and this. That doesn't mean BIP 110 is good, just because in your view core is bad. And I think there's a little bit of distancing from Signal to me, and a lot of ideology wrapped up in the whole thing.
Totally agree.
I think that last point's really sound, Cole. Like, you can have legitimate gripes against core, and there are many, but that doesn't mean we have to force this emergency hard fork against consensus and try to bully everyone into this quick change. That does not follow, right? So poor logic. I think that's a really strong point. My main point here is that I'm going to reiterate, Bitcoin's most valuable feature is that it is hard to change. And the reason is, number one, it's easy to co-opt things that can change easily. And number two, all changes have risk. Any change has a risk. And I'm going to bring up a word I originally learned from Taleb. However, I think Bitcoin Twitter learned the word when Saylor tweeted it, which is iatrogenic, which comes out of healthcare and essentially means a health problem or illness caused by the treatment or the test rather than the actual illness, right? I just looked up a medical study. Almost 100,000 Americans die every year due to medical errors. This is a nurse who's working too long and tired, gave the patient the wrong medicine, dead. This is a surgeon who does surgery on the wrong knee. Maybe that doesn't kill you, but there's many examples of this. And so we have to be aware of iatrogenesis in Bitcoin, and pushing changes that don't make sense are iatrogenic, or they could be. And so to me, like, this comes down to, is this change above the bar? Is the issue it's proposed to solve above the bar? And it's clearly not. The silent majority has no opinion, doesn't care, has nothing to do with this. A few loud people on both sides chirping online, but in the wise words of Chamath, it is below my bar, and I think it's below the community's bar, and move on.
Yeah. Chamath is so annoying to quote because he's like smart, but he's also like a dick. So I don't know, but I agree. I agree with, or like a scammer, but like I agree with this one. I have one more thought, but Fernando, go ahead, please.
No, to I think it was Brandon who was talking about this very early in our Think Boy chat. Is that, when you discover Bitcoin, it's a highly individual journey, right? Like, yes, you have an online community, you can go to conferences, but essentially you have to, like, sit down with yourself, read, listen to podcasts, and kind of like think about a lot of things, right? Like, it's radically different, and a lot of the things that you were taught when you were younger, a lot of those things you got to unlearn, right? And that takes like huge dose of humility and It's not for everyone, right? To kind of like go through that ritual, but it's a very deep ritual that once Bitcoin clicks in your head and you start seeing things differently, and the world is now seen through a different lens, you kind of want to shout about it. You want to like tell everybody, right? It's a very transformative thing, which is good, but it's also leaves the door wide open to kind of like that these things that you unlearned. There's a gap there that you need to fill, and a lot of people, myself included, and I'm speaking from my own experience, that gap was filled with like more like radical, maxi thinking, right? So I became all right wing, carnivore, anti-state, blah blah blah, all that shit. Then after a time, and for me personally, you start working in the Bitcoin industry and you start realizing that, hey, a lot of these Bitcoin companies are funded by VC money. Yeah, their lifeline is based on fiat, right? We need fiat to fund a lot of things that doesn't have an immediate ROI. Yeah, we need to fund people through a foundation or an organization to support developers or cryptographers to do to study. These are people who maybe they get paid in Bitcoin, but that Bitcoin is bought by money that comes from fiat, from those who are closer to this fiat spigot, right? VCs. I mean, let's be completely honest about this, right? There's few companies that are really on a true Bitcoin standard. And you start, seeing that a lot of the products that are being sold, they're sold for fiat. It's not like Bitcoin only is the only, unit of account. So you start realizing, at least me personally, that, hey, okay, maybe, this whole like Bitcoin only thing is not really realistic right now, and we're more in like a bi-monetary period where we are in this transition where both Bitcoin and fiat has a place in society. And then fiat does its thing, and then we'll just fucking disappear, and Bitcoin will go up in value. But we are kind of like in this like transitional period where maybe the goal is hyper Bitcoinization, but we're not there yet. And a lot of Bitcoiners need to understand that a lot of your favorite Bitcoiners, they get paid in fiat, they work for fiat. It's not that utopian yet, at least. So those realizations to me made me realize, okay, this whole mantra is nice. Don't trust, verify. Nice slogan. I like that. I identify with that. But then I look around and I'd be like, it's not really true. And I think the BIP 110ers, and this is my point, sorry for the long intro, it's like they're kind of like stuck in that like very intense emotional phase that you go through when Bitcoin clicks in your head. And you want to like put your identity on those things, on those values, and they become even stronger when you see, okay, there's people out there that also share these same values with me. So it becomes like a very negative feedback loop that I think ultimately the BIP 110ers, those who support them, I think Luke and Mechanic and all these people that are like closer to it, they have their own reasons, whatever. But the supporters that are on the outside looking in and they get bamboozled by the things that they say, that's the only thing that keeps them on BIP, on team 110, if that makes sense. And I think that is the cringe part of the culture that we need to eradicate. And I think that is for outsiders looking in, not appealing at all. And I'm kind of like happy that hopefully this is like the last gasp of this like core-tard, and this is the core retards that the BIP 110ers are, because they talk about critical thinking. They use like war language, like capture, and this is the last bastion, and like this is an attack, and it's very conspiratorial, and not really rooted with reality. And I think probably a lot of BIP 110ers in the chat. You need to really sit down and look at yourself and be like, what is what am I doing? Because I think Bitcoin is very organic. It's an organism. There's a lot of symbiosis with a lot of different things that is part of the real world, and that means that fiat will have a place in it, whether you like it or not, at least in this very early stage where we are in our lifetime, right? So I think that is the main gripe that I have. Sorry for the rant.
Yeah, but there's consensus. So what are you talking about?
Yeah, true.
It's gonna activate, right? It's gonna activate. You see, but it's just like those things that those are the things that put me off, right? Like, no, you are using the word consensus wrong. You know, like it's a courtesy. 55% minor signaling is a courtesy. Like, yeah, I agree. But again, I think it's totally fine. I think everyone goes to their own Bitcoin journey in a different and their own way. Anyone can try to propose a change or think something is bad and all that. Like, I think it's fine. I actually think it's a very good way for Bitcoin to show what Brandon was alluding to. You know, it's hard to change. So yeah, you can try, and that's okay. Like that is the whole game. So I don't have any other like spite against them or whatever. Like I think this is just how it goes. One thing I have been thinking about also, you know, with the, so I want to say, like, I'm not a conspiracy type guy, but like this is looking like it's going to be a chain split, right? Some people say like this is going to be a chain split of like 1 hour or something, or maybe 7 hours before the BIP 110 part of the chain actually hits a block, right? Other people say it could be longer. I also think about BIP 110, like this whole idea of chasing wrong use, and having like a perpetual policing state or chase around, you know, these are the people that are using it wrong and the consensus change, etc. I think this whole discussion around that actually weakened the social fabric of the decentralized kind of like community we have now. This COLDCARD thing is happening, and a lot of people are moving funds, obviously, either temporarily or just to new places. And so when this chain split is coming up, this is not the right moment in time to do a lot of transactions, right? I looked at a few articles where people were talking about like stuff that could go wrong. I'm not super into it, but it's more like, hey, in August, if you need to do actual big transactions, you need to really figure out how you're doing it. And so I just wonder what you guys think. Like, is this all a coincidence? Is this coordinated? Is that a stupid idea in general, or stupid question in general? Because I do think like the weakening the social fabric of a decentralized community would, for me, be like the number one thing I would try if I would want to attack what is in essence an idea and a protocol that can never die, right? Like the idea of absolute digital scarcity and Bitcoin, etc., is just out there. So that cannot die. So what do you attack? You attack the social cohesion and kind of alignment that people seemed to have. Like just by asking questions and having conversations on X, a lot of people blocked me, which is just weird, right? Or they call me, you know, all these bad names, where, you know, I'm just a random guy on the internet trying to figure this out for myself as well. So I just really wonder what you guys think, and I also want to check the time with you guys if you still have like 15 minutes or something to continue, because I do also want to touch upon Brandon's topic that he shared in the beginning to end with.
Yeah, I've got about 15 minutes. That's probably right. I'll comment on your thought. Like, is it all coordinated? Is this a social attack? Okay, first of all, you're right. That is an effective strategy. 3-letter agencies, and before 3-letter agencies were involved, every social movement would have plants inside and try to disrupt the leadership. Why did they make drugs illegal? To selectively prosecute the civil rights era, right? There's countless examples of this. So we should be vigilant to that, right? And on the other hand, okay, it doesn't have to be that. Just because that attack is relevant and ongoing doesn't mean that that is the driving force here. So we shouldn't let, just because it's possible, accept that it is happening. I don't know the answer, right? Is it all coordinated? I don't have a strong opinion there. But I would say, to bring it back to the Apache for a second, so this decentralized social hierarchy we call the Apache, they were attacked by the Spanish originally, and the Spanish went and killed the leader, and then the Apache group didn't die. They just got organized into a centralized group, and they beat back the Spanish. Then Mexico got their independence. They went north, tried to kill the Apache, couldn't do it. Guerrilla fighters, there's no head of the snake. They gave up. America went west. They couldn't stop the Apache. Now we're 300 years into this low tech, low sophistication culture that didn't make pyramids, they didn't make great roads, but they had a durable social hierarchy. That's obviously Bitcoin. However, the downfall of the Apache were the US, they finally said, you know what, attacking them head on doesn't work. So what they did was they gave them 100 head of cattle and they said, hey, Apache, figure out how to distribute these cattle amongst your people. And the Apache created a council of elders and they decided who gets the wealth. And they essentially created a hierarchy, started distributing wealth. And that ultimately led to the downfall of that social group. And they ended up on the reservations. The land was split in half, etc. So they got fragmented, put on the reservation. And I share that as a cautionary tale because if this specific time the attack is coordinated or not, there will come a time when this ramps up further and further and further, and we will have to face that fight. And so to summarize, I don't know, but we should be vigilant because for sure those attacks are happening now and they will continue. And it is an existential threat. So we have to be vigilant to that. But short term, I don't know if it's happening. Right, to steelman why it's not happening, LLMs are new. We have newer frontier models. People can try to hack Bitcoin because if you steal the Bitcoin, you can probably get away with it relative to other types of attacks. So it's not surprising that the frontier models are attacking Bitcoin now, right? So I'd be the steelman against the timing of this being coordinated.
Yeah, I mean, the only way that they can attack the network is attacking the people who are participants, right? Not the network itself. So what is more, draining that will turn you hopeless in a second than getting, your life savings erased in a second that you stacked for 7 years and all of a sudden it's gone. The demoralization of the people who have believed in Bitcoin for this long. I mean, it takes that to kind of like erase all your ideology, perhaps, right, and all your belief in Bitcoin, just to get stripped of all your money. So this could be a coordinated attack in that sense, just to get people who have been in this space for this long to be completely just be depressed and lose faith because they lost all their money, because there's really nothing else apart from the people that are participating in Bitcoin that you can easily destroy instead of the network itself. I think they probably tried to do that back in the day. Technically it's not possible, and the social layer is kind of like the only thing that could be weak enough to attack. And individual holders, people who are just normal, living their life, working a job, stacking sats. Yeah, that's a big volume. Like I don't know how much Bitcoin is now. It's like 1,700, 1,800 across like so many people. That's devastating, and a lot of those people probably are going to give up and never care about Bitcoin and focus on some other things. A big chunk, I would believe. I would have serious doubts, even though I believed in the ideology and whatever. It's like nothing is more demoralizing than just losing your savings like that so fast. So I think it's kind of like just one layer of attack, one vector of attack that the powers that be, whoever that is has figured out. Like, okay, this is the layer to attack right now. I don't know.
In my opinion, that's been known for a long time, right? Like KKK meetings are infiltrated by feds. Like I heard on a podcast recently, someone who worked for the intelligence agency thinks over half of the KKK meeting attendees right now are feds. And that's partially to justify the budget they have to go fight things like that.
Yeah.
But essentially all these groups are infiltrated. Guaranteed by 2015, there's feds in Bitcoin, 100%. It doesn't, but the question would be, are they just keeping an eye on things, or are they pulling strings? Are they behind this attack or not? I lean towards not. I think there's enough circumstantial evidence to say that this could just be like Occam's razor There was a bug, it was exploited. You know what I mean? But
Yeah.
this is the type of attack that you would expect. And that's the hard part here is we need to be vigilant of these attacks, but not all attacks are of this nature.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cole, any thoughts?
I agree with you, Brandon. I don't think it is a coordinated social attack if I had to put my money on it. I do think that, you know, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And I think there's stories that have been shared from Bitcoiners in the past, whether it's you, Bram, spending on a fancy pair of headphones or something that broke, or people legitimately losing Bitcoins in the past that have stuck around and they're stronger because of it. I think you're starting to see the community rally around those people that have been demoralized heavily. And I do think the social attack with Bitcoin 10, I wouldn't say it's a coordinated social attack just because of how ineffective it's been, but the general view that I have is that nature is the best teacher and Bitcoin is the best teacher. Like if you're not presenting honest and valid productivity to Bitcoin in whatever way, Bitcoin's just gonna turn you down and show you and push you back into alignment with honest and valid productivity. And we're seeing that. And I think Bitcoin, the network, and the people around Bitcoin as well will be more intelligent through both of these episodes as a result.
Yeah. Yeah, what I love about the proof of work is that it permeates in all levels of Bitcoin, right? Last week or a few weeks ago, I was listening to Ram Das, and I heard him say, true virtue doesn't care about being virtuous, right? So true virtue is just doing, right? It's not signaling, and if you're signaling your virtue, you're actually a lower level of virtue because you're not living it, right? And so the whole idea is that if you live your virtue, then you are actually the example for people, right? And for me, that's also the essence of proof of work, or this contribution that you talk about, Cole. It's like, and also again, the thing with Bitcoin 10, it's the whole projection of the values doesn't really matter. Like I think it's great if people have other ideas. That's all good and all fine and always necessary, right? But especially in this context, this is just not how it's going to work, right? So I think it's a pity of the eventual energy that you could also put positively towards anything else. But saying that, I do think a lot of people in the Bitcoin 10 camp would probably think they're positively contributing to whatever they believe, right? And that is also fine. Again, this is why I just think Bitcoin is a radical is a radical game, because in essence it just doesn't care, and you need to get to that consensus. So absolutely fascinating, actually, just to see it work again. By the way, and this is also one of the biggest fights or changes in the past 5 years, right? So there were also a lot of people that don't have the history of what happened before, and they need to learn basically how Bitcoin works. And again, that's all fine and necessary, right? But yeah, I honestly also think that's part of what we're seeing. To wrap up, we have like 5 to 10 more minutes. Brandon, at the beginning, you were talking about, before we started recording, you added this topic or question, right? Like, what happens if Bitcoin is only a 50-year money, or a 500-year money, or a 5,000-year money? Like, what needs to be true to get there, or one of these cases to be true? Obviously, when Satoshi wrote it with 2008, 2009 knowledge, they didn't know about the future. And how fast, the underlying thesis or reason of existence of Bitcoin would actually unfold, how fast or slow. So before we started, you said, well, maybe Bitcoin is just a lifeboat, and it's 50 years, and all of us here and anyone listening or having, being in Bitcoin, owning Bitcoin, we are in the life raft. It's going to be fucking crazy. And after that, we'll get to abundance, or maybe we need it longer, and it is a multi-generational thing. So please elaborate on your thoughts there, and then let's wrap it up like that.
Yeah, so this idea came about a few years ago when I was thinking about, like, failure modes around Bitcoin. What could stop it? One is it's easy to change. So bad actors co-opt it, change the rules, and we make KYC coin, for the example, right? Another reason is technology outcompetes Bitcoin, and for some reason we can't adopt the new technology and port the UTXO set over. Right? Those are the two reasons traditionally monies have failed. And so I was sort of thinking through those things and what is Bitcoin like. And then the 50, 500, or 5,000 year, those scales, those are just good ways to put our mind behind the thought experiment. Like, what would it take for Bitcoin to be around in 50 years? In 2010, the idea that Bitcoin would be around 50 years is crazy. The idea today that Bitcoin will be around in 50 years is definitely consensus, right? But if you go to 500 years, that's a whole different kind of problem. And very few things last that long. And so the thought experiment is like, how do we go from a 50-year money to a 500-year money? How do we know if Bitcoin is or isn't? Do we have a role as individuals or the culture to preserve this thing long term? Or do we only rely on the incentives set out from day one? And the rest is just how will humans interact with those incentives? And we can't really influence the outcome. And so that's sort of the high level framing. I want to quote Satoshi here before we discuss. So Satoshi said, "You will not find a solution to political problems in cryptography, but we can win a major battle in the arms race and gain a new territory of freedom for several years." Right? That is a very pessimistic Satoshi quote based on what you see in the culture over the last 5-10 years. But I think it's good to acknowledge that Satoshi was not as confident in that as most of the Bitcoin hodlers are today. And so, if it's only a 50-year money, is that bad? I don't necessarily think so. I think we're going through a radical shift here. We brought up AI. So I honestly think we're in a civilizational fork. On one side, it's like hyper centralized AI governments, social credit scores, your money can be turned off, like dystopian gay AI communism, and we're all just swept up in it. On the other side, you have something more like going back to markets, decentralization, the exact opposite for us. That would mean smaller nation states are more competitive rather than large. Cryptography is asymmetric defense on your money, asymmetric defense on your information. And so I kind of see that's where we're at. So if it's only a 50-year money, Bitcoin is the life raft to get us to that other side. If we didn't have Bitcoin now, I don't think we have much of a chance as a society to push back against the encroaching super centralized AI state. And so that gives me optimism. But if you look out to 500 years, that means we have to get through this fourth turning. We have to survive the third generation curse, which is essentially first generation family builds wealth. The kids of those parents, they saw the sacrifice. They're aware of what it takes to build that wealth. Third generation knows no sacrifice, no pain. All they know is life is easy, so they squander the wealth, right? So we have to survive that. We have to survive the transition. We have to survive technological changes, social attacks. And if we can get through that 50-year period, maybe we are looking at a 500-year money. And then the question is, how do we go from 50 to 500? Do we set up a council of culture and we have initiation rites and we pass down the wisdom like the church? Do we, there's all these fun experiments to think about that. Or do we actually not have much influence in that outcome? And instead it's like, hey, did Satoshi set up the incentives right way back in the aughts? I don't know the answer, but I think it's a fun thought experiment. I'd love to hear your guys' point of view here.
Maybe we put all our commandments in op return, and then people can. I'm just messing around. This is for me. This is the part where I'm thinking about like GG, right? Or like just some, even Szabo. Like last week, I read an article by Szabo from like from like 2001, 2002, like just mind-blowingly deep. And I think like it is great that Bitcoin has found like big thinkers, or let's say someone like GG, right? Like Bitcoin is time. It's just absolutely stunning, right? Like that is so mind-blowing. I wonder if any idea could actually find like deeply philosophical thinkers that could like churn out content like that then influences other people and then go on, right? Like, I don't know if that's the case. I do think Bitcoin is a very special like technological discovery. And when I personally read the GG stuff, I very much align with it, and same with Thomas Strohlight's stuff, right? Like, it gives me a very far perspective into the future, but it's all conceptual, right? Like, it's all concept. Like, the hope derived from that is all conceptual. It's not practical at all because we still have to do shit, right? Everything we're basically or a big part of what we've been talking about, which includes the stewardship. So how I've looked at technology before, like startups and stuff like that, right? Like, if you can build anything, especially now, by the way, in this time and age, like, what should you build? The answer is not everything, right? But the question becomes, the question of what should I build becomes a very even more rigorous exercise in time of AI, and you can build anything. So what is the reason of existence, right? Like, what is the problem or the need that people actually want a solution for? That is very important, right? Because not wanting a solution, not wanting to solve your problem is actually a choice, right? Is also, not solving your problem is making a choice. I hope that makes sense. So why does Bitcoin even exist, right? And when you talked about how Bitcoin culture died, let's say, in this period 2022, I feel in my Bitcoin journey there was so much education on the very deep implications of like fiat monetary debasement and all that stuff, and like how dark that future actually looked like. And then like the GG and the Tomer stuff compensated that for me. Does that make sense? Right? Like, they gave me a different way to look into the dark fiat money future. And that is what helped me to get on the Bitcoin path more. And I do think I'm trying to do that in my own way on my channel, but I do think it is lesser of that, right? Like, the whole crypto thing took over, it's investments, it's quick, blah, blah, quick gains, and all the fiat degeneracy. But that, again, on the other side, is for me a signal of where fiat is going, right? Like, it's the fiat end game. People are trying to gather as much as possible before the fucking game table collapses, right? So it is just a way of looking at it. And I think I can see the positive side of it, but it also comes from the fact that I gave myself all that education and all the content was there, and it spoke to me in a certain way. So if we want to be like a 500 or plus year money, how do we steward the why, right? Like, there was a hard money time before, and they went to a soft money, right? And like, those cycles have repeated many times over in history as well. So it's not like the people in the hard money times actually were like, that's never gonna happen again. And so that is also why Bitcoin, I think, will be attacked. I mean, supposedly they sunk the Titanic to sign the Federal Reserve Act, and whatever. If that is the level that this whole battle is at, let's say they actually sunk the Titanic because, these opposing people were on board. And whatever. Let's say it's like that. Just assume it's that, right? How do we combat that in terms of knowledge and motivation and the stewardship over time? Because that is extremely hard. Like, this is probably the biggest negative or challenge thought I have around Bitcoin. Like, if this is really the battle, we need way more conversations, education, and all that stuff. So that is kind of my thought, and I don't really have an answer. Like, how do we even get there? Like, it's difficult to project the future, but again, a certain view of it, I think, helps me move forward, even with all the uncertainty that is still there.
I got a quick response to that one. Like, I think the question, if I can summarize, correct me if I'm wrong, it's like, how do we get newcomers to understand the big why? How do we get them to understand the philosophical implications here, which will build conviction?
Like, it's not an investment. It's not an investment, guys. Like, like that, for example.
Yeah. So in my honest opinion, we never will. NGU is what brings people to Bitcoin, and it will be what brings people to Bitcoin forever. The people who stick around and join the culture, which we're all a part of, and also mocking ourselves through this whole conversation, that's what that task would create, is more culture warriors, right? And my fear is that going back to the Myers-Briggs stuff, the early adopter gets swept up in the big picture, system thinking, technology, forward thinking, et cetera. Those folks are already here, and they make up a small percentage of general population. And so I don't think we should assume future adopters need to adopt the orthodoxy for Bitcoin to succeed. They'll just adopt it because it solves an obvious problem to them. And sadly, that probably means buying it from their bank rather than a niche company, of which I work for and fully believe in and support. But I think that that's the harsh truth here is the Bitcoin culture never scaled, and I don't think there's anything we can do about it. Can we help on the margin? Yes. Can we help those around us? Yes. But does it actually change Bitcoin's long term? It's hard for me to believe that.
Yeah, I agree. And coming from a country where I see just how big of a difference just being able to save money is in an environment that is hyperinflationary, I think NGU is enough. Preserving your purchasing power and having a savings technology that you can put your hard-earned money to convert it into from pesos to Bitcoin. I think is the best thing. We should just stay on that track because we can just imagine what the fiat standard is going to do in 50 years from now. Is the USD going to inflate? Is the Argentine peso going to inflate? Is the Turkish lira going to inflate? Et cetera, et cetera. Yes. Is that going to be the case in 500 years from now? Yes. Maybe it will totally collapse and change color and change denomination and the name, but they will still print money out of thin air. Argentina has gone through many, many crashes. They just changed the name of the currency and continued the fiat standard. So this is only going to accelerate. And Bitcoin being the antithesis to that is all people need to know, because that is the biggest scaling incentive that people have across the world. Everybody's going to feel it. We just need to be there with the message that, hey, this is the alternative. Right now, for people in Argentina, stablecoins is the alternative. But it's the same type of need. It's the same type of mechanism. It's just a different denominator. They use synthetic USD, which is, by the way, the cultural standard in Argentina. If we can become the cultural standard in Bitcoin as just for savings technology, that's going to change people's lives drastically. And that has a ripple effect that will make us be able to penetrate history and time and cultures like a needle, instead of trying to penetrate all of this with a bazooka, if that makes sense. Because we're trying with our narratives to penetrate cultures with a bazooka, and then we don't understand why people aren't listening. But if we are able to just keep NGU as the main door that people go through just for savings and protect themselves for what is bound to happen with every single fiat money across the world, then I think we're here for 500 years easily.
Okay, Cole, you can wrap it up.
Sure. Yeah, I think there is for one thing, I've started talking about Bitcoin on Instagram and TikTok for the first time. And I go on there and I've done research, and basically nobody is talking about either fiat or Bitcoin on those platforms. And there's a massive, group of people that are tuning into the corruption of the state and vaccines and the COVID pandemic. And they're aware of all of this stuff, but they have no idea how the money connects to it. And that's like another frontier that I think Bitcoin's adoption will embark on and charge through. And I agree with you, Fernando. It's like I saw this video yesterday of these people on the coast of California, right on the beach, and there was this trapped creek that was maybe 100 feet from the ocean, but it wasn't reaching the ocean. And so it had pooled, and there was all this debris and beach gear, all this stuff, and they built this channel for the water to flow through, and it was still blocked. And they took this small little 2-inch shovel and dug a small little hole, and then the creek started flowing. And it's this very small stream of water, and 30, 45 minutes later, it's this huge, powerful wave of water that's flowing from the creek into the ocean. I think for a lot of people, when you make that first initial crack into their brains of like, whoa, this is the fiat system. I don't even think it's about Bitcoin first. I think it's first about their current lived experience and their reality. And when they can connect it to the US dollar or the Argentine peso or whatever fiat currency they're using, and how it triggers and causes all of the other experiences that they're seeing on it and feeling on a day-to-day basis, that's when that stream of water really starts to open and it starts to compound on itself. As to Brandon's question on how it survives over 50, 500, potentially 5,000 years, I do think the incentives are paramount, and I think they're the reason why Bitcoin has won over its initial 17 years, and I do think it's why it'll win over the long run. There's a lot of incentives, and one of them is survival as a species of nature. Like, me having more purchasing power is better for my survival than having less. And there's a direct incentive with Bitcoin as an NGU technology that enables that and causes me to push my energy into Bitcoin because of that. And then there's the incentives of the network to attract hash rate and the difficulty adjustment and all of these other things. But it's like, well, how does nature, I think the connection, at least in my mind, is how does nature survive and exist and propagate itself over centuries and millennia? It's like, well, one, it's a decentralized force. Two, it's extremely adaptive to itself. Something dies and decays here, and it figures out how to use it, and adapts, and it evolves, and it gets more intelligent around it. But it also has these strong incentives built around life and death, which I just touched on a little bit. Like, species in nature, and nature itself wants to survive. And so what pushes me away from death and what enables me to live healthier, longer, whatever it is. And again, I think Bitcoin aligns with all of those principles. And on the survival point, it enables me to live a longer life, a healthier life, a more prosperous life. And so I have an inherent natural interest in the Bitcoin network. And I think a lot of that is yet to be awoken in many people. But once that small little crack is made, that's when the magic starts to happen.
Yeah, I love that, dude. I think this is also the thing, like, how do you touch more people is you just start living according to this whole philosophy, right? And just showcasing that just by literally just doing it. So yeah, maybe that's just where we're at, guys. I want to thank you for a marathon episode. I hope people found it valuable. I thought it was really interesting. If you're down to do it again, let's definitely do it again. I thought it was really fun, and there's probably endless topics we could jam about. So I want to thank all of you. I'm going to put your X links in the description so everyone can follow you if they don't already. And yeah, thanks a lot, guys.
Thank you. See you guys.
Thanks, Bram. Really
Thanks,
enjoyed it.
fellas. Next time,
See
let's
ya.
do it when it's not so crazy in Bitcoin and I have a little more sleep under my belt.
Cheers.